transformation of cities through urban planning, a thing that had come, of course, relatively late to the United States after the war, and then had, but then in the American sense, with this enormous economic growth after the Second World War, urban planning, urban renewal, urban transformation in America in the first 20 years after the war, 25 years after the war, became an incredibly impressive and powerful tool, and one that was seen by mayors all over the country as this tool with which you could completely reshape cities, economies, cultures, etc. So Detroit, from being a relatively rough and proletarian, raw 19th century city producing cars and boats and with hard-working, dirty, dirt-covered working class culture, and then having gone through all the problems that it had in the 30s and 40s, and also it achieved a renaissance. That was the idea. The city achieved a renaissance, and that was what the mayor said, a renaissance through urban planning. And this is not the last time that this city announced a renaissance. Here you see George Emery, I think it is, the master planner of the city of Detroit in the early 60s, explaining how the city could be in the film, explaining the highways, the new expressway system, models of the new civic center. So an entire area on the river was being demolished and replaced by this enormous scale of the civic center with a Cobo Hall. You can see there the round thing that is also built for real. A new central business district, shiny new buildings in this new language, this new architectural language that had come from Europe, with people like Hilbersheimer and Mies van der Rohe. Walter Gropius had come during the war from Europe and had completely changed the architectural style of the United States from the ornate neo-Gothic or neo-Renaissance skyscrapers of the 30s, like the Chrysler Building, or the Art Deco, like the Chrysler Building, into these extremely sharp and abstract modernist slabs and blocks. Here you see the project that I will come later to, the Lafayette Park project by Mies van der Rohe and Hilbersheimer in Detroit. So this was the new landscape of Detroit that was being promoted by this mayor in Detroit City on the Move. And of course, this was extremely important, culture. There had to be parks with sculptures and fountains and bronze statues. There had to be nearly a kind of American reproduction of high culture. In the film also showed how in the center of the city there were restaurants and there were operas and theaters where you could dress up for, and you could put on your evening gown, and you could, if you would be, you could. It's a bit dark, this slide. But these are people in their evening gowns, wearing pearl necklaces, fur coats, going to the theater. I don't know why this is. Is there a way to make it more bright? No. Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. A symphony orchestra is created. A symphony orchestra. So that plays enormous outdoor concerts in this new park made exactly for this. So the elites the white elite of Detroit can go and enjoy European classical music. They even they have a museum where the classical arts of Europe are also represented. Baroque paintings can be visited in the Detroit Art Museum by women wearing funny hats and pearl necklaces. And of course, Detroit offers one of the most green cities in the world, especially on the outskirts, where you could have fantastic mansions standing in the green. So Detroit all of a sudden can present itself in 1965, 1966 as this city. You have to imagine it as the way that Almere in the Netherlands presents itself, as this city that has everything modern to offer. And while other cities are just busy with their problems and dealing with their problems and their problem areas, and it's difficult to create new projects in other cities because there's no money and the cities don't grow. You can see how Almere builds a new city center, makes an enormous leap into the future by adding 150,000 inhabitants to it, etc., is promoting itself as a city that does have culture and that does have monuments and that does have an urban life. And it tries to sell itself to the rest of the country. That is exactly what, in 1965, Jerome Kavanagh and his team of ultra-sophisticated planners and builders were doing. Now, a little bit a flashback. How did this all start? Where did this city, before we go forward from 1966, where did this all start? This is basically the first real big urban plan for Detroit, made by a French planner called L'Enfant, the same guy who did Washington. And this is his plan for Detroit. This is what 1807. This is what now is the central business district. Then very soon this city started growing like crazy. It started industrializing like crazy and growing like crazy. It was on the river, on the Canada border. It's funnily enough, it's south of Canada because it's where a piece of America folds itself over Canada. So if you look south from Detroit, you see Canada. The city just goes like endlessly, just following the property lines, no real urban plan. There's just these two streets coming together in its central business district. And it starts being built out and built out at an incredibly fast rate. So this is the city in 1873. This is the city around 1900. So what you see is this endless plain of this endless grid plane cut through with these diagonals. In the middle, there's this funny cake point of the central business district. Then, and as far as you can see, factories and low-rise houses. This is the center of Detroit around 1900. So at a very fast rate, the city has been urbanized. Here you can see it around 1920, the skyscrapers in the real pre-war American sense, Art Deco and neoclassical skyscrapers. All this was fed by the subsequent development of first Henry Ford's motor car plant, and then General Motors, and then Chrysler, the big three as they call them. The Ford plant, this is one of the first ones, more or less developed the assembly line principle, created enormous factories, all built by one architect that you should all study, Albert Kahn, the biggest architect in the world, even if he was just this tall. Probably built the most square meters of any architect in the world. He developed a whole new factory complex around this idea of the assembly line. The assembly line meaning that you just put one thing in, you put one, here you have some guys who just put wheels on cars all the time, and there you have a guy who just paints one part of the car all the time, doesn't do anything less, and the car moves past the workers, which was then a completely new concept, and it allowed for the production of the Ford T, the first mass-produced car in the world. So this whole idea of mass production, assembly line production, Fordism, Taylorism, it all was invented in these cities, and it also created such an enormous attraction for workers coming there from the South and the Midwest that this city started growing at a rate that was, even in America, not known. Here you have some more of these gigantic factories, the River Rouge plant, the 1920s. This is also one of those Albert Kahn plants. And it produced this urban landscape, a kind of endless reproduction of single-family houses that sometimes were cut up in pieces and then rented out on endless orthogonal lines. This, by the way, is exactly the area where the riots broke out 40 years after this picture was taken. So this is the landscape of Detroit just after the war. A central business district, and then an endless plain with about 1.8 million people living there. This is the center. I don't know what's going on here. I'm not sure if it's a riot again or not. So this was the city in 1950. This is a postcard of Detroit in 1950. So here you can still see this old type of American city. And this was also a city that had many problems. Behind this facade, behind this inner city, and these were the problems that Jerome Kavanagh was trying to deal with, hence his film that was presented 15 years later. So this is what he started out with. In the center, a successful central business district, a successful, beautiful city. But if you would go out, you could see one thing happening that was really problematic, and for you, completely invisible to see, I think. No, it's not. What you can see is the enormous spreading from 1930 to, and this chart goes on till 1990, but you could already see it in the two darkest shades, how between 1930 and 1960, while first the blacks would live in very confined areas, the black communities would live in very confined areas. The darkest black, that's the area where they would live in 1930, 1940. And then already in 1960, the slightly less dark areas was where they would be the majority in 1960. So what you see is that this city is gradually going black. And why does it go black? It goes black because the whites move out. They move to the sides. They moved up this long line on the top, that's 8 Mile. They moved to the other side of 8 Mile in communities like Northland, etc., communities that do not pay taxes to Detroit, of course. So the whites stop paying taxes to Detroit. The whites flee the inner city and live around it in some of the richest suburbs in America at that time. And the blacks, they stay inside the city. Of course, the riots in the 40s have played a dominant role in this. Another thing that has played a dominant role is the desegregation. After the 1950s, it was illegal to forbid blacks to live in a certain area. So, in principle, blacks could live anywhere where they wanted, which meant that the whites said, we're gone. Because the racism was still enormous, but the laws allowed the blacks to live anywhere where they wanted. Then you had the riots, and this together led to what they call one of the biggest problems of American cities, the white flight. The whites leave the city, and the city gradually turns black. By now, as we speak, the city is over 90% black. What you see here is also the economic strength. Here, the blackest is the strongest, is the richest, and the white is the poorest. So you can see here that the white is the center of Detroit, and the black is where all the whites have gone. So all the money has left the city. This is in 1951. And here, the density. The black is the densest. So you have an incredibly poor, black, and incredibly dense inner city. And around that, you have spread out suburban white wealth. It's a very, but also also on the urban